Welcome back to the studio. It's a computer game. Not on a cartridge, it's not on a floppy disk, on a cassette tape. And today, I'm going to load it the way a lot of people actually loaded software at home in the 1980s. Then, we're going to compare that to modern storage and see just how far we've come. Because right now, this tiny card can hold more software than a whole shelf full of cassette tapes. But the cassette has one thing going for it that the SD card doesn't. It makes you wait long enough to think about your life choices. So today, we're saving a program to cassette, we're loading it back, and then we're going to load Top Gun from tape and find out how bad cassette data storage really was. Before thumb drives or SD cards, SSDs, cloud storage, and modern computers that save everything automatically without you even having to think about it, a lot of home computer users actually stored their software on cassette tapes. And I know that sounds a little strange now because we associate these with music or mixtapes, something that you find in a box in the garage. But for early home computers, cassette tapes, well, they were a real storage format. It was slow, it was mechanical, and it could be fussy, but it was also cheap and familiar and available. And that's what really mattered, because in the early home computer era, the computer itself was already a serious purchase, and adding a disk drive could be just as expensive as the computer itself. So a lot of families started with cassette storage first. Today, I want to use cassette storage the way that people actually used it. First, we're going to save and load a simple basic program, and then we're going to load a real commercial game from cassette tape, Top Gun. And then we're going to compare that experience to modern storage. Not just the speed, the whole process, the buttons and the waiting, the sound, the moment where you're staring at the screen wondering if anything is actually going to be happening. A cassette tape is an analog audio format, and most people think of music when they see one of these. But a computer can store data as audio. At the simplest level, the computer turns digital information into a signal that can be recorded onto tape. And when you load the program later, the tape plays that signal back, and the computer tries to decode it into data again. That's why cassette data sounds like this. That sound is not music. It's not a modem. It's not a printer having a bad day. That's the actual software. And that's what makes cassette storage so interesting to me. The program's not just sitting there as a silent file on a drive. It has to physically move past a tape head in real time. The computer listens to it. The tape has to be good enough. The deck has to be working. The signal has to be readable. And if something goes wrong, the computer usually doesn't give you much sympathy. It just doesn't load. Now for this test, I'm going to use my Commodore 128 in C64 mode. The C64 is a great machine for this because it sits right in that era where cassette, disc, cartridge, and now modern SD-based storage all make sense in the same conversation. And this is the Commodore C2N Datasette. Unlike just plugging in a random tape recorder, the Datasette was designed specifically for Commodore computers. The computer can control the motor, it can sense the tape buttons, and it can read data through the cassette port. So when the Commodore says, press play on tape, it means that literally. You are part of the loading process. You don't just click a file, you press play. And honestly, the physical interaction is part of what makes this interesting. Modern storage is almost invisible. This is very visible, and it has buttons. Before we jump straight into Top Gun, I want to do a simple test. I want to save a small basic program to cassette and load it back. That way I can prove that my old dataset's actually working, and we can show the basic process before we sit through a commercial game load, because that could take a while. So I'm going to type in a very, very simple program, and we'll see if that works. So we're going to start off with 10 print vintage electronics channel, and then 20 go to 10. All right, so this is going to be our basic program. Let's run it, make sure it works. And it does. Not exactly Microsoft Flight Simulator, but it does the job. So now we're going to save it to tape. Let me stop this, and we're going to save it. So we're going to save VEC test. All right, so now it should say, press record and play on tape. Now, I've already wound my tape past the leader. If you don't do that, you may not save your program properly. So now we're going to press record and play. And it has sensed that. So now it should be loading or recording that program onto the tape. And it just feels different so far. The computer's not just quietly saving a file. It told me to press record and play. So that's what we did. Now the Commodore is recording the program to the cassette as a data signal. The tape's moving, the program's being written. And unlike modern storage, the process has a pace that you can actually see. So for a little program like that, it didn't take too long. It says it's ready now. So let's give this a test and see if we can load it back. So this time we are going to clear out the memory, make sure there's nothing in there. All right, now we need to rewind the tape, and then we're going to load VEC test. See what it says now. It's telling us to play the tape. All right, so now we know it's loading. We're not really seeing anything on here. It's looking for the program, which it may take a second because it has to get past the leader. So we'll let this run for just a second. Should be finding it pretty soon here. And even for a small program like that, it takes a while. All right, it says it found VEC test. Now we wait for it again. And now it's starting the deck back up and it's loading the program. All right, looks like it's ready. So if we run it, all right, so it looks like that worked. We saved a program to the cassette and loaded it back. So that took a while. It's not SD card speed here. It's a little bit clunky, but the basic idea of this is pretty clever. The computer just stored that program as sound. Now, it's not the most convenient thing in the world, but it is pretty cool. So now we'll move on from this tiny little test program and we'll use Top Gun for the C64. And this is the part that I really wanted to try, because saving a 2-line basic program is one thing, but loading a commercial game, well, that's closer to the experience that I actually had in mind. So when this was new, you went out and you bought the game. You put the cassette in, and then you end up waiting. And the waiting is kind of part of the fun. All right, so let's do it here. We need to stop this program, and then we're going to load Top Gun from the cassette. And we're going to start a timer and see how long it takes on the real hardware. Now, the instructions from the tape actually give us a shortcut to actually run these. I'm going to go ahead and clear the memory out just to make sure we have nothing left in there. All right, so if we hit the Shift key and run stop, it says press play on tape. So we press play, and now we're going into the loading sequence of this program. Now, this one is going to take a while. Right now, it's searching for the beginning of a program, the program name, the beginning of the file, and so we need to wait for that now. Now, if we had a different computer, some of them, you could actually hear the sound of the games loading. Luckily, Commodore wasn't like that, but the thing that did help with is you knew something was actually happening. On the Commodore, until it actually finds something, Top Gun right there, you really don't know if it's working. So now it's stopped the tape, it's found the program, and now it's going to go into the loading process. And we're going to end up with some color bars on the screen to let us know that it's actually working. It's kind of loading in, for this game, a little bit of a loading screen so we can actually see what's happening. It feels slow, and it is, because this is real time from a cassette tape. So luckily this one shows us how many blocks we have to load so we can actually see that it's doing something. One of the most frustrating things with these was loading a program from tape where it didn't show you it was doing anything, getting to the end and it didn't work. This one, if it doesn't load or it stops, we know that something actually went wrong with it. So, you start to understand that using software this way kind of required a different kind of patience, not the kind that we have today. Today, if something takes too long to load, we just assume that something's wrong. But back then, it was part of using the machine. It doesn't mean it was better. I'm not going to romanticize it that much. But, it's absolutely less convenient, but it does make the software feel more physical. You're aware that the machine's actually doing work. You're aware of the tape moving. You're aware that the program exists on that thin strip of magnetic tape, and the computer has to read it in order. And that's a very different relationship with data than we have right now. And it's why cassette was frustrating. If the game takes several minutes to load, you wait several minutes. And if something fails near the end, you have to start over. There's no instant retry. There's no progress bar that gracefully recovers, no pop-up that says, oops, let's try that again real quick. You have to rewind the tape and you have to go again. Now, this is also why you can understand, why disk drives were such a big deal. Even before we compare speeds, just the experience of not having to babysit a tape, well, that's a major upgrade. But the cassette actually had something going for it. It was really cheap. And the drive was way cheaper than a disk drive. A lot of families already understood cassettes. So even if the process feels strange now, it made a lot more sense to people then. It was a really practical way to get software into the home. Not the best way, but it was a reachable way. All right, let's see if we can find out how long this is going to take. Because I've been talking a while, and we're still loading, and the tape is still about halfway through. So let's fast forward this segment, see how long it takes. Well, there you go. The one thing I can say about cassette data is that it builds anticipation. And I don't know if that's actually a good thing or not. Because I know a lot of times after I loaded a game when I was a kid, I was kind of disappointed in how the game turned out. Is it slow? Yeah. Is it a little bit fussy? Yeah. But it works. And for the time, that's really all that mattered. So after using this for a little bit, I think the obvious question a lot of people are going to have is, why would anyone put up with this? Well, the answer is pretty simple. It was cost. The disk drive was better, but nobody needed a time machine to figure that out. But better usually costs more. And for a lot of early home computer buyers, cassette storage made the whole setup more affordable. When my dad bought this Commodore 128 back in 1986, he had the foresight to go ahead and buy a disk drive. But a lot of people didn't do that. They bought the computer, they bought a data set, and they started saving their programs or loading games without that bigger investment of the floppy drive. I remember that drive cost more than the computer itself. And that matters because home computing wasn't just about technology. It was about getting technology into regular homes. And the cassette helped do that, especially in Europe. Now, it was a compromise, but it was a useful compromise. It let people save what they typed. It let software be distributed cheaply. These cost a whole lot less than floppy disks. And it let kids and families actually use the machines without needing the full expensive setup from day one. So it's slow, but it wasn't pointless. It solved a real problem. If cassette was the affordable entry point, then the floppy disk was the upgrade. And this is where the experience starts to feel more like what we expect from computer storage. With a disk, you can have a directory. You can list files. You can load a specific program without manually searching through a tape. It's still vintage, it's still mechanical, and it's still slow compared to anything modern. But compared to a cassette, it's a major improvement. Just being able to put a disk in and do this, it matters. We can type in load, $, and then we can list a directory. That seems really basic now, but compared to a cassette, that's a huge quality of life upgrade. Cassette made storage affordable, but the disk made it more usable. And that's really the difference. And then we get into modern storage. This tiny card can hold a ridiculous amount of data compared to a cassette. I've got one that's got thousands of games on it. But the bigger change isn't just the capacity, it's the convenience. Modern storage gets convenience out of the way. You can browse files. You select what you want, and then you load it. There's no rewinding, there's no searching by ear, there's no tape counter, no hoping the signal's good enough, no wondering if the 30-year-old cassette's about to make you start over. Now, using something like an SD-based storage solution with the Commodore 64 gives you a completely different experience. You still get to use the real machine, you still get the feel of the original hardware, but you're not locked into every limitation of the original storage. And that's one of the best parts about this hobby. You can choose the experience that you want. If you want the authentic cassette experience, it's there. If you want to actually use the computer without spending half the afternoon loading one game, modern storage is there too. Both of them have a place, but I know which one I'd choose if I only had an hour to play around. So putting these side by side, the difference is pretty obvious. The cassette, it's slow, mechanical, and sequential. You have to go in order. The floppy disk, still old school, but it's usable. Modern storage, well, it's fast and quiet and tiny and pretty much invisible. But each one tells us something about its time. Cassette tells us about early home computing that had to be affordable. The floppy tells us that people wanted better organization and less waiting. Modern storage tells us how far the whole idea of saving a file has come. And honestly, that may be the biggest difference. With cassette, saving and loading software was an event. You noticed it, maybe you heard it, you anticipated, you participated in it. And with modern storage, it just happens. Is that better? No question. But it also makes it easy to forget how much work used to be involved in something as simple as loading a game. So how bad was cassette data storage? By modern standards? Well, pretty bad. It's inconvenient and it's slow. It depends on moving parts and old tape and clean tape heads and maybe some luck. And loading Top Gun from cassette's not something I'd want to do every day. But I also understand why people used it and why people still enjoy it. It was affordable and familiar. It was good enough to get people started. And good enough to get people started is a bigger deal than it sounds. Because this was one of the ways home computing became reachable. It didn't become perfect. It didn't become fast. It became reachable. And that's why I have a hard time being too harsh on it. It's easy to laugh at cassette storage now, but at the time, the little tape there could hold a game, a program, or something that you created yourself. And for a lot of people, that was enough. I will say that I do appreciate the experience more after using it now. Modern storage is faster in every practical way, but this makes it visible and it makes it more visceral. I really, really like that. And when the game finally loaded, it felt like something happened. And that's the part that still works, even if the format itself is too slow. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, let me know what storage format we should try next. Floppy disks, zip disks, old hard drives, optical media, backup tapes. There are a lot of strange little chapters in storage history. Well, as always, thanks for watching. I appreciate you all being here. And until next time, happy retro computing. Actually, I should probably rewind this before I forget where the game starts. See you next time.